Hello all, welcome to video number 2 for Perl scripting. We only have one more video to go and then we're done with our Perl section. So let's go ahead and get started. This video, we're going to talk about lists and hashes and controlling the flow of things, so loops and iterations. But let's go ahead and start with lists and hashes. So far, we've only used scalars, which are numbers and strings. But what if we want to group information or express some type of connection between different parts of data? If we want to do this, we can use an array. Each piece in the array is an element, and our array indices start at 0, just like in other languages. If something has a one-to-one correspondence, such as a directory or a phone number, that is where we get into hashes. So hashes are going to be grouped together. We're going to get a little bit more into the similarities and differences in a few slides. Let's start out with lists if we're going to create a list. So the first one on the left is a simple list. We're just saying print 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it is creating a list of those 3 values, and we're just printing it. Now, we can do a more complex list, which is what is on the right-hand side. And here we've got a list that has strings, numbers, and variables and escape sequences. So we can actually put anything we want in a list. If we were to run the one on the right, it's going to put all of those together and make a sentence. Now, the one thing we cannot do is we cannot put a list inside of a list. So where we had multi-dimensional arrays before, we can't do that in Perl. Perl will flatten out that and create a single list. So just keep that in mind as we go forward. If we want to access certain list values, let's take a look at this code here. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. I want to print number 2. What word is going to print? Well, hopefully you said mustard, because in the programming world, we start at 0. So salt is 0, vinegar is 1, mustard is actually 2. We're referring to the specific value within that list by using the square brackets and the index in which it is in. Something cool that Perl does allow is negative index values. So can we have a negative number? Yes, actually we can as an indice. Now, previously in other languages we've dealt with, it will give you an array index out of bounds. Doesn't do that in Perl. So if I say that I've got an array of months, so say January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. If I say give me -1, it's just going to count back from the end of the list. I think it's kind of cool. So if I say month with a -1, it's actually going to give me back December. So it's going to go to the end of the list and give me the first one off the end. I think it's kind of something cool that Perl does that a lot of other languages don't do. You can take a slice of a list or a portion of a list, and you can also use a list to indicate a range. So the top one here, I've got heads, shoulders, knees, and toes. I'm taking a slice using my square brackets, and I am selecting 2. And here I've got 2 values. So I want number 1 and I want number 3. So this is actually going to print out shoulders and then toes, because remember, heads is 0. So 0, it is going to print shoulders and then toes. I can do a range by using the indication for a list of the regular brackets or parentheses, and I can say 1.6. This is going to create a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's going to create a range with including both sides that you've given it. An array stores a list. So your variables in arrays are going to start with that @ sign, and the same rules apply to arrays as do scalar variables. So it has to start with either a uppercase or lowercase letter or a number or a hashtag. No numbers or an underscore. Good grief. Then you can have as many characters as you want, plus the underscores up to the 251. So here in my example, I've created a variable and I used the my, and I'm going to put at days. So it's going to be an array of days. Here I've given the array of days by indicating it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So if I print out days and then the new line, it's going to print each day of the week. I can add elements to an array. So here I've got array 1, and I indicate the values directly on the declaration line. If I don't want to do that, I can actually reset some values. So here, array 2, I'm giving it array 1, and I'm adding these other values on. So array 2 in this case is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Because remember, if I put a list inside of a list, it just flattens it. Now here I'm resetting it to be 3, 5, 7, 9, and I'm saying I'm going to put a 1 in front of it and 11 after it. So if I print it out, it's going to be 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and then 11. If I want to access specific elements, I use those square brackets just like in most other languages. So here I can say, give me element number 1, which would be the 3 because it's 0 and then 1. I can also use variables though to indicate the subscript. So here my subscript equals 3, print the value in array of number 3. So 0, 1, 2, 3. It'll print a 7. Then here, it's going to take that array element and change it to a 12. So it's going to say 1, 3, 5, 12, 9. The difference between the $sign and the @ is that the @ is the array and the dollar is the scalar value within the array. I can use loops to go through arrays just like I can in other languages. So here I've got a for loop, and it's going to go through every element in the array, and it's just going to print out that element. So I can say for the iterator, and then in parentheses, the list or the array I want to go, and then my block of code. It's very easy to run through arrays using Perl. There are specific array functions or array operators. Perl really doesn't distinguish between the words, functions, and operators. So they kind of use them interchangeably. So it's going to do something to or with an array. I have a reverse, which is going to count down the array instead of counting up. So if I want to go from the end of the array to the beginning, I can reverse the array and it's just going to flip it. I can do something called a pop and a push. Now, a pop and a push is going to treat the array like it is a stack. And a stack is nothing more like an example here, a stack of plates. So you push, something goes on top of your stack, and to pop, something comes off. The opposite of push and pop is shift and unshift. And so push and pop do something to the top of your stack. Your shift and unshift is going to start at your bottom. So push and pop are going to add it and subtract it from the end. Shift and unshift are going to add and subtract to the beginning. Finally, I can do a sort on an array, which is going to be an alphabetical or numerical order sort on the elements within that array. I said we were going to come back to hashes and get a little bit clearer. So here's a graphic that I really like. So a scalar is a singular piece of data. One of something is just kind of floating out there. An array is if you take those singular pieces of data and you arrange them so that they are connected or they are related. So it's kind of like taking those pieces and building a tower. Now, a hash, on the other end, contains pairs of data, but they're not in any kind of order. But you will have a pair. So those pair are related in some way, shape, or form. Let's see it in action and it'll make a little bit more sense. In order to create a hash, we start our variables with the %, and we call it a key and a value. So Gary lives in Dallas, Lucy lives in Exeter, Ian lives in Reading, and Samantha lives in Oregon. These hash keys have to be unique. There are multiple ways to do it because remember, Perl loves to do things in many different ways. So the way that I kind of like the syntax a little bit better is the one on the right. So Gary is given the value of Dallas. Lucy is given, I'm not even going to try that again. Ian is given the value of Reading, and Samantha is given the value of Oregon. These both do the same thing and create the exact same hashes. In order to work with a hash, you can do a few different things. So let's take a look at this code. So up here at the top, I've got my place is Oregon. Here is my hash where. So this is just the one that we went over, Gary's in Dallas. And this is where I'm setting up my main hash. Now I've got that reverse. Remember what I said, reverse flips everything. So my who is going to reverse my where. So what it's going to do is the key is going to be Dallas and then the value is going to be Gary. The key is going to be Reading, the value is going to be Ian. So it's going to take this column and flip them. Next, we're going to look up some entries. So Gary lives in, I want to know the value in where. So where's my hash up here, and then I send it the name Gary. It's going to look up and say Dallas. Okay, so it's going to print Gary lives in Dallas. The second one, Ian lives in where? I can send it Ian, does the same thing, finds Ian, says Ian lives in Reading. Next, the bottom two take the reverse, so the who. So who lives in Exeter? So it sends it the word Exeter. So here, so it's going to say Lucy lives in Exeter. Here I use a variable, so my variable is called place, and the place says Oregon. So you're going to look up in who and find Oregon, and then you're going to say Samantha lives in Oregon. You can see how there's definitely a pair and a matching that goes on with the hash, but the actual order of the hash doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter if Gary's first or Samantha's first. That's not the whole point of the hash. The point of the hash is that Gary lives in Dallas and Samantha lives in Oregon. You can remove something from a hash where you use the word delete. So delete out of the where Lucy. So all of a sudden Lucy's gone. Thank goodness, because Lucy's town is hard to say. So now my hash is just going to be Gary, Ian, and Samantha. If I try to print Lucy, it's going to give me an error because, well, we deleted her. She gone. We can access multiple values. Now, remember that default variable we talked about in video 1? Well, here we're going to use it down here in our for loop, and it is going to be set to the name, and it's going to be able to look up the value using that default variable. That default variable is going to be your keyword. So for my keys in where, print, the default variable is going to be the first key, lives in where the key is. So it's going to print Gary lives in Dallas, Ian lives in Reading, Samantha lives in Oregon. So here, that default variable kind of comes in handy when you don't want to give it a specific value because that value is going to change. Next, let's take a quick look into loops. We've got our if loop, which is just an if, and our evaluation in parentheses, and our block in our curly brackets. And in there, we're going to do some type of comparison. So and, greater than, less than, things like that. Now we can compare strings, and we can use a greater than, less than, equal to, or not equal to, but we don't use the symbols. We use a GT, LE, EQ, and an NE. So the GT says A sorts alphabetically after B. So if B is greater than, B comes after A. Okay, so greater than for strings means it's closer to Z than A. Less than means alphabetically before. So whatever is less than means it's closer to the A and not the Z. Equal is the same, and then NE is not equal. So here down at the bottom, if my password equals what I guessed, then I can pass. So that's going to make sure that whatever is in this variable and whatever is in this variable are equal, even though they're strings. We do have an if, else, if, and then an else, just like we have in C. So if condition, action, else if, else if, else if. At the very end, we can add that final else, which is our default if all else fails. We use those same curly brackets to indicate our blocks throughout our ifs and else ifs. we can do a for loop, and for loops can be used for constant lists. We can use them for arrays, and we can use them for hashes. Now, the difference between that constant list and the array is just that the array is given a variable name. So here I can see that for a for loop, I say for, and I have some kind of variable to increment, and then I send it either the list, the array, or the hash. It's going to go element by element through whatever it is that you sent it. I do have a while loop, and it's just like we did while in other languages. So while something is true, it's going to do something. The biggest indicator for while loops is that you do have to change whatever value you're comparing somewhere in the block, or you're going to get stuck in that infinite loop. We have a do while loop, and again, just like before, you're going to say do a block of code while something is true. Here we've got a bunch of shorthand, but that's okay. It's not bad. So here I've got do, I've got my default variable, and I'm setting it to whatever comes in. I'm going to do this chomp, which is just a function. And here I'm going to reverse what it gives me, and I'm going to send it back and print it backwards. That's all this really does. The last kind of loop I have is my loop until. And this is a little different than what we've done before. So I've got until a condition do value. So it's very, very similar to the do while, but remember, Perl likes to do things multiple ways. So in this case, I kind of put that condition instead of the while up near the until. So until something, print this value. That's all I've got for this video when it comes to lists, hashes, and controlling the flow of your Perl programs. Next time, we're going to finish up with that third video for Perl, and so can't wait to see you next time.